do LGBT individuals suffer from a lower prevalence of mood, anxiety, and substance use problems in Massachusetts than in California?
Again, I don't know of a study that compared California to Massachusetts on any of those outcomes.
Okay, and I was planning to ask you about the other outcomes, but the answer would be the same, right?
Right.
No further questions, Your Honor.
With us today from New York and Virginia, we have Evan Wolfson, whose work is focused on winning marriage equality, and Maggie Gallagher, who is president of the National Organization for Marriage. Now, Mrs. Gallagher, is it correct that you believe...
Here's the bottom line. Not only do the majority of people, but the majority of courts have recognized that gay marriage is not a civil right. The majority of people believe that it's a civil wrong. Same-sex unions are not marriages. And yes, you have the right to live as you choose. You may even need some benefits or some protections. But you do not have the right to redefine marriage.
Yeah, but see, we're not redefining
You
marriage.
are, Evan. You have to be in reality.
Please don't interrupt.
For the majority of Americans,
the same groups that funnel their money through Maggie Gallagher's organization are opposed to partnerships and civil unions and every other level of respect.
Maggie, is it true that you oppose civil unions as well?
The National Organization for Marriage does not take a direct issue on civil unions. However, we would if it were interfering...
So if there were a ballot issue that said gays can have civil unions, would you back off and stay out?
Let me just say, our focus is on the marriage issue and on the religious liberty consequences of other kinds of benefits and protections.
Right. And what I said was that the same funders who are funneling their money through this organization are opposed to partnerships and every other measure of respect.
The National Organization of Marriage. I have fought for the marriage issue for 25 years, Evan, because I believe the ideal for a child is a married mother and father. Marriage is not a relationship invented by the government. Marriage is a social institution with deep roots in nature.
Listen, Mrs. Gallagher, you're entitled to believe whatever you want. What I said is that the funders who funnel their money through... Stop interrupting, please. You're under investigation for violating campaign laws in 3 states, and you know that.
We obey the laws of this country.
Then why are you under investigation for flouting those laws?
Your Honor, the plaintiffs are in the same position as Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving, who in 1967 had no interest in diluting the institution of marriage. They only wanted to marry the person they loved, the person of their choice, who happened to be a person of a different race. That's all the plaintiffs desire, the right to marry the person they love, the person of their choice, who happens to be of the same sex.
Well, now, the Supreme Court decided that the issue which we are confronted with here, was not ripe for the Supreme Court to weigh in on. That was 1972. What's happened in the 38 years since 1972?
The Supreme Court in Lawrence versus Texas reversed Bowers versus Hardwick with a 6-3 decision, and the majority of that opinion, Justice Kennedy and 4 other justices, decided that case on the basis of due process.
The statute in Lawrence was a criminal statute.
Yes.
The denial of the right to marriage of same-sex couples doesn't have any criminal sanction.
I submit it doesn't make any difference. Our fundamental rights cannot be taken away unless the state has a very, very fundamental, strong, compelling reason to do so. And it acts with surgical precision so that it takes no more than the compelling reason justifies. We're talking about a group of individuals who meet every one of the standards for suspect classification. They are a minority. There wasn't any dispute about that. It's an immutable characteristic. The witnesses said that.
I was a very precocious kid. So one day I ended up looking up the word homosexual in the dictionary. Something along the lines of a romantic attraction between members of the same sex. And it slowly dawned on me that that's what I was.
So given your prior testimony about homosexuals, how did you feel when you realized that you were gay?
Well, once I realized what a homosexual was, I was scared by that. I realized that this was bad news for me, so I hid it as far away from everyone as I could.
And around this time, did you talk to anyone about being gay?
When I was in the 7th grade, I remember being taunted about being gay. I was called faggot, I was called a homo, a queer. It was scary going into that building, realizing these kids were taunting me with a word that was so close to the truth. I would go home crying.
Did your parents ever find out that you were gay?
When I was 13 years old, my parents discovered my journal, and for the first time I had admitted to myself that I was gay, and I had actually written those words, and they found that and read it.
And what happened when they read that journal?
They were very upset. They were yelling. I remember my mother looking at me and telling me that I was going to burn in hell. It was shocking. I had never heard anything like that from my mother. I mean, you don't get much worse than eternal damnation.
And what is NARTH?
NARTH stands for the National Association for Reparative Therapy of Homosexuality. It's a reversal therapy organization based in Encino, California.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you at NARTH? From what ages?
14 to 16.
And during the time that you were at NARTH, how was your home life?
My mother would tell me that she hated me. Once she told me that she wished she had had an abortion instead of a gay son. She told me that she'd wish I had been born with Down syndrome, or that I had been mentally retarded.
Who did you meet with at NARTH?
I met with Dr. Joseph Nicoloski.
Where would you meet with Mr. Nicolosi?
I did actually fly out to California to do in-person sessions. I recall Nicoloski saying that, you know, homosexuality is incompatible with what God wants for you, and your parents want you to change, and that this was a bad thing.
And were you given any advice on how you would be able to suppress your homosexuality in these therapy sessions?
I remember it was a general admonishment, but not a specific technique, no.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Cooper, you may cross-examine.
Mr. Kendall, have you ever lived in the state of California?
No, I have not.
You've never read a scientific study addressing the concept of sexual orientation, isn't that true?
That is true.
And isn't it also true that you have never studied whether a person's sexual orientation can change throughout the course of his or her lifetime?
No, I haven't studied it.
And nothing involved in this conversion therapy was your decision. It was all your parents' decision. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And at some point, you communicated to your parents your objections to the counseling treatment, but your parents compelled you to go against your will.
That is correct.
Your only goal for conversion therapy was to survive the experience. Isn't that true?
Absolutely true.
You didn't have the goal of changing your sexual orientation. I'm sorry, correction. You didn't have the goal of changing your sexual attraction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Indeed, you admit that you did not truly want to reduce your sexual attraction to persons of the same sex. Isn't that true?
That's correct. It's my experience that people don't want to go to programs like NARTH.
Well, you acknowledged in your deposition, did you not, that some people report to have effective results with this conversion therapy. Isn't that true?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
And was this therapy successful in that you were able to suppress your homosexuality?
Nope, I was just as gay as when I started.
While you were in conversion therapy, were you introduced to any people who purported or were purported to you to have successfully undergone conversion therapy?
I remember during one of the group therapy sessions, Nicoloski trotted out his perfect patient, the guy who had been cured of his homosexuality, and his name was Kelly.
And did meeting Kelly have any impact on your views of conversion therapy?
I remember once when Nicoloski stepped out of the room, we were talking amongst ourselves, and Kelly told me that later that night he was going to a gay bar. And that he was just pretending to be cured for the sake of his family.
And why did you stop going to reversal therapy?
During this whole thing, my life had kind of fallen apart. I didn't have the world that I grew up in. My faith, which was very important to me. My family, which was even more important to me. Everything had just kind of stopped, and I just couldn't take anymore. And I realized at one point that if I didn't stop going, I wasn't going to survive.
What did you mean by that?
I would have probably killed myself.
Your Honor, our submission, obviously, is that sexual orientation is not an immutable trait, that it is an accident of birth.
What do you mean, an accident of birth?
An accident of birth in the sense that the term has been used consistently by the Supreme Court to identify the kinds of immutable characteristics that go into the calculus on whether heightened scrutiny should apply. The Ninth Circuit Court in the high-tech gays case said, unequivocally, sexual orientation is not an immutable characteristic. That is a quote. But perhaps the most vivid evidence was an APA study which indicated that over a 10-year period for women who identified themselves as homosexuals, some 2/3 of them had experienced a change in their sexual orientation at least once over the course of their lifetime.
I had a hard time relating to the concept of being in love when I was married to my husband. I honestly just couldn't relate to people when they said they were in love. I thought they were overstating their feelings. Making a big deal out of something. It just seemed dramatic. When you grow up in the Midwest and in a farming family, there's a pragmatism that's part of the fabric of life. And I remember as a young girl talking to my mom about love and marriage, and she would say, you know, marriage is more than romantic love. It's more than excitement. It's hard work. And in my family, that seemed really true. So I thought that's what I was signing up for when I got married to him. Not that it would be bad, but that it would be hard work. When I first met Chris, I was teaching a computer class, and she was a student. But then we ended up being friends, and I began to realize that the feelings I had for her were really unique, and they were absolutely taking over my thoughts and my entire self. And I grew to realize I had a very strong attraction to her and that I was falling in love with her. And not only were we in love, but we wanted to join our families and have the kind of life of commitment and stability that we both really appreciated.
How convinced are you that you are gay? You've lived with a husband. You said you loved him. Some people might say, well, it's this and then it's that, and it could be this again.
I'm convinced because at 47 years old, I have fallen in love one time, and it is with Chris.
I have been gay as long as I can remember.
I have no attraction, desire to be with a member of the opposite sex.
I have always felt strong attraction and interest in women, and I have only ever fallen in love with women. I'm 45 years old. I don't think I'm anything other than gay.
The American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the major professional mental health associations have all gone on record affirming that homosexuality is a normal expression of sexuality.
Finding of fact number 46.
Individuals do not generally choose their sexual orientation. No credible evidence supports a finding that an individual may,
through conscious decision, therapeutic intervention,
or any other method, change his or her sexual orientation.
Professor Herrick, can you please describe your educational background?
Yes, I received my doctorate in social psychology from the University of California. My dissertation focused on heterosexuals' attitudes towards lesbians and gay men.
And turning your opinions, Dr. Herrick, what is sexual orientation?
Sexual orientation is a term we use to describe an enduring sexual, romantic, or intensely affectional attraction to men, to women, or to both men and women. It's used to refer to an identity or a sense of self that is based on one's enduring patterns of attraction.
So is homosexuality considered a mental disorder?
No. There were empirical studies that had been conducted that had failed to support the view of homosexuality as a mental illness.
Okay, looking at the study, the definition and scope of sexual orientation. It says, we suggest the term sexual preference is misleading as it assumes conscious or deliberate choice and may trivialize the depth of the psychological process involved. We recommend the term sexual orientation because findings indicate that homosexuals' feelings are a basic part of an individual's psyche
and are established much earlier than conscious choice would indicate. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yes, I do.
But these immutability characteristics, they really are not the important factor, are they, in deciding what the level of scrutiny is?
Well, Your Honor, yes, with respect, it is a critical element, but it isn't more or differently critical than, say, political power. And, Your Honor, under the Supreme Court's test for political powerlessness, we would submit to you again that the evidence is overwhelming that gays and lesbians are not politically powerless, notwithstanding Dr. Segura's testimony.
Dr. Segura, how have ballot initiatives in this country affected the rights of gay men and lesbians in terms of political power?
Well, for starters, I would include in this undocumented aliens who are a distant second. There is no group who has been targeted by ballot initiatives more than gays and lesbians. The number of ballot initiative contests since the late 1970s is probably at or above 200. Gays and lesbians lose 70% of the contests and 100% of the contests over same-sex marriage and